Hey guys, I'm here today. I'm gonna sew Freya's for you all, and I know a lot are a little afraid to sew swim fabric because it is a little slippery, but the key is to pin. Now you're gonna notice I don't pin a lot, but that's because I break my serger blades when I do. You're gonna want some ballpoint needles because that's what I use, and it actually works out well for me. And I usually use the size 11. I'm sewing women's, so swim cups. I got these on Amazon. If you are bigger than a double D, you're gonna want to get it on Wall-Wack. I got this beautiful fabric from Bean Pop to sew with, and got it from a secret admirer. Pretty sure I know who it is though. And this is the coordinating fabric. Hi Lisa. So first thing we're gonna do is the tie. And this is just the bodice tie. You just put your fabrics right side together and sew all the way around, leaving an opening so you can turn it. Now, honestly, if you didn't want to do this, you could leave it unfinished and it wouldn't be a big deal. But you notice the swim fabric is very slippery. Let me try to get you guys so you can see the machine better. Okay. Because swim fabric is slippery, if I'm sewing, I like to pin where I start at least. And those that have watched my sew-alongs, you know that I don't pin a lot. So and for this, hi Kristen, for this I'm just using a longer stitch length because I'm just going around it, but I usually recommend you just use your stretch stitch on your machine, or you use a serger or a cover stitch machine. And forgive me, my machine has been causing me trouble all day today. I was debating on going live, but my bobbin thread's not picking up for some reason, and I keep having to redo my bobbin. So if you guys have any tips for that, that would be awesome. But for some reason it's not picking up my bobbin. It might be this thread, because I'm not using stretch thread. I'm actually using embroidery because I wanted it to match the swimsuit. And yeah, I think it's this thread because it just got hung up there too. Go slow around these curves so you can keep the shape on the end of these. And leave your opening on the end. And I'm going to go ahead and serge this too, because I want to not have to clip all of those seams. I probably should have just started with serging, but those curves suck. I'm just clipping strings now so I can turn it right side out. Yeah, Leah, embroidery thread is so much easier to mash or to match colors. And I have a lot of it already, so I tend to just grab it instead of anything else when I'm sewing. Right now I'm just turning the tie right side out. Now in the pattern it does say to top stitch. I prefer mine not top stitched because I like the look of it. It's fuller when it's not top stitched. So I'm just going to leave it. There is a small opening in it, but that won't be a big deal since it is swim knit and it won't unravel. So that's my tie. And next we're going to sew the straps. Straps are super easy. Just turn them, fold them right side together. And I'm using my serger on it. I don't know if you guys can see my serger. I'm going to move this because I'll be using my serger a lot more than my sewing machine on this. And you sew down the length, and then you're going to sew one of the ends. That's it. I always clip this corner and this corner so that when it turns it's a little flatter. And then just turn it right side out. I'm not going to iron today because I didn't have room in here to put my ironing board up because I'm actually sewing in my living room. The kids are outside playing. But that's one of the straps. And I'm going to sew the other one now. So how many of you are going to be sewing your first swimsuit with this pattern? I know a few did during testing and they turned out amazing. Candace, I've never had a problem with embroidery thread, but I buy the good quality embroidery thread, and the only thing is it's not great for gathering, so I always use a thicker thread for gathering, but I've never had a problem. Now, you can top stitch these. I do not like the way knit straps look when they're top stitched, so I never top stitch mine. But it is optional in the pattern. If you want to top stitch, you can. Now I'm going to lay my straps and my tie aside. And those were pretty basic. Now we're going to sew the bodice. And the bodice is, sorry, I'm unorganized. The bodice is 3 pieces. I sewed my lining so you could see. This is the women's pattern. The kids is all 1 piece, but the women's is 3 pieces so that it curves out for the breasts. Now, after you sew these sides, you hem, but I went ahead and did my hemming on this one beforehand, just because I was testing out my machine before I started, since it... Sorry guys, they're riding 4-wheelers up and down the road. But I was testing out my machine, so I went ahead and hemmed these, so it is hemmed already. You can leave this unhemmed. It is the opening for the tie, and if you leave it unhemmed, it will just make that opening a little bit smaller. Hi Norma. Now, pay attention to your bodice. I always start pinning at the bottom of my curve. Let's see if I can show you. Women's bodice, this one particularly, is made with a curved edge here, and the side piece has a curved edge also. And I always start pinning at the bottom, or start sewing at the bottom, since I don't pin often. But you would just pin along that curve and keep pulling the fabric to match it up all the way to the end. I am going to put a pin right here before I put it in my serger, just to help hold it together as I start. Really, it's hard to see. Oh yeah, you don't have to hem it. The baby's version, I didn't add the hemming because it would have made it a lot more difficult. The one I did, I hemmed, and it was really difficult to turn that small hole under, so I didn't add the hemming to it. And then I thought, well, women's and kids, you don't have to hem it, and then if you don't hem it, it's a little bit smaller of an opening, which is something a lot of people like. If you are doing woven and these seams, because some of our dresses have these, please pin, because woven you can't angle it and make it fit right. So that curve is much easier to sew if you pin it. And that's half of the bodice done. Now we will pin the other side, or sew the other side. Again, for those just joining, some kids across the street got a new four-wheeler and they're out riding it up and down the road today. So it's quite noisy out there. And I have the windows open because my kids are playing outside. Now, that's the front bodice. It's hard to see, but it does curve in for the cup. Now I'm going to top stitch the seam allowance on the inside. I'm going to top stitch it away from the center after I rethread my machine. I have issues with this thing today, Tyson. You're gonna have to fix it for me. Just a minute, guys. My thread's getting caught on that.
Which part?
The part right up there at the top. Where my thread holder, where you fixed it. Sorry, guys. I'll be right back with you. My thread got wrapped around my thread holder and tangled up because I have a broken spot on it. So it's keeps catching my thread, and I'm going to have to, my husband's going to have to fix it again. See, it's broken off. It's kind of rigged to just stick on there, and when the thread gets wrapped around it, it gets stuck. So I hate using these little spools with it. I usually use these because it works better. So I think I'm going to just switch over to it. But it's embroidery thread too. It just doesn't tangle around my thread holder there. Sorry about that. Now, top stitching this seam allowance away from the center. Just making sure that that seam allowance goes under it. Okay, so if you guys can see, the top stitching goes right along that line away from the center. You can probably see it better now that I'm using red thread. Thanks, Amber. Now, I think this part is one that a lot of people dread. For women's, putting in the cups. So I'm going to angle you guys so you can see. Tyson, I knocked my cups down. Can you grab them? Thank you. Okay, you can see that the cup curves in for the breast. This is the lining, and the right side of the lining is what will be against your chest. So you want that curve to go so that it's toward the outside. So it caves in on the outside. So you want to pin it approximately 1/2 inch up. Candace, I'm actually trying to go slow. I speed sew a lot, so I'm trying to go slower so everyone can follow along, and I keep having to slow myself down. So, basically, I pin those two, and then I flip it over so that I can pin it all the way around and make sure I get it smooth. And I'm using the triangle cups. You can use the round ones. You can use push-up cups. It all depends on what you want for your body type. I did use push-up cups on one of mine because I took them out of an old bra. It does wonders. And I'm just moving my back pins around to the front where I had it pinned. So you can see, I hope you can see, that it actually curves in. And now you just slide it onto your machine. And basically you're just stitching it in place. So all the way around the cup, right along the edge. Oh, it helps if I don't get the fabric turned under there. And that's it. Then you just repeat it with the other side for the other cup. So it's just sewn around the cup to top stitch it in place. Got fabric and thread on these. Oh, my fingernail got caught. But for these triangle ones, I line up the top of the triangle, the point up there with the seam that we sewed. Yes, it is weird, Danielle. Flip it over again and just pin around it. Go the other way. Now on kids, you won't have all these steps for the cups and for sewing the bodice, so it goes a lot faster than the women's does. My kids, I can sew in about half an hour and have it all ready. Women's takes me longer because of the cups and the bodice. Again, I got it pinned all the way around. And I just slide it in right side up because you can feel the padding as you sew, so you will be hitting it. And that's the cups sewn in. So the bodice is ready. Now the next step, and I'm going to show you guys, this pattern has a torso adjustment line on it that you will cut across. You measure your girth, or your child's, which is from the top of the shoulder around the crotch and back up to that same shoulder. And the girth measurement is in the pattern. It's listed in the finished measurements. You will take that girth measurement and subtract your child's if your child's is smaller than the measurement in it, or subtract that from your child's if your child's is bigger. Sorry. And then you divide the number that you get in half. And that is the amount you add in here. My daughter's torso is, and I'm making this for her, my teen daughter. Her torso is 2.5 inches on each side that I had to add in because it was 5 inches longer than what was listed in the pattern. So she's got extra length, and this is what makes the one piece fit. So that's something you need to pay extra attention to when you're working on your pattern. Make sure you check the girth. And it's all listed on the finished measurements in the women's. The girth is right here. So the girth is on for every size. I printed the pattern so I could be sure I did it in order for all of you, because I tend to not go in order when I sew. Now, if I can quit losing everything. What I like to do, since we are sewing now, the front body, which this is the ruched version, so it's really long. The front bodice to the front body. And I pin the side here. And I pin the other side. Some of the bigger sizes, because especially the bigger cup sizes, you will have to stretch more. That is so that you do not have to have elastic under the bodice. The bodice will help hold your breasts up without that. So some of them you will have to stretch more than others, and that's fine. It's not a big deal. If you're not feeling comfortable stretching it, just sew a gathering stitch across it and sew it and gather it to fit, and then sew it on. Now, back to the serger. Pull it back over here. Sorry. Trying to make sure everybody can see. Like my pretty frozen castle my daughter put on my serger. There's an Easter egg on the end of my sewing machine too. Now, I break mine into sections because it's easier to stretch. So, and this table bounces a lot. So straight across under the hole, because that's going to be helping you hem it. And then stretch the other side too. Pretty simple. And I'm going to do the same thing with my lining. If you get confused, and see, my lining fabric's all the same, so, and my lining piece, it's actually, since I'm doing a not ruched lining, the piece is not as long, so you're either going to have a shorter front lining piece or a longer front lining piece than the back. And you can also look, the back, the leg seam here curves, and the front curves out and the front doesn't. It curves in all the way around. Just a little tip in case because I know we had a couple that actually sewed their lining or their back to their front bodice, and that's an easy mistake to make. Anybody got any questions?
I got a question. How many people are watching you?
Right now it looks like 14. There were 25 earlier, but it is Sunday and I know people are getting ready for church. Again, for anyone just joining, the bigger cup sizes has more to stretch. Nope, wrong machine. To fit. So they will be stretching farther. And that's to eliminate the need for elastic under the bodice. Is that the cat?
I have no idea.
I'm not sure either. Now, once we get that sewn, I'm going to clip my strings first. And back to the sewing machine. And I'm just setting up my stretch stitch because this does need to stretch. So make sure you're using a stretch stitch. And what I'm doing now is this seam, it's a little more difficult on the lining because of the cups, but you can push the cups in and that'll help them lay on your machine easier for sewing. But what I'm doing now is I'm taking the seam allowance and catching it in at the bottom to sew straight across, and that will hem the bottom of that hole on the bottom. But you can see I just used the lightning bolt stitch is what I used on my machine for that. And I push my cups back out, and so they curve in. And that's the front lining finished. Dropped my main. Now I'm going to do the main, the outer body here. Exact same thing. I always hold the back of mine when I'm doing this because it helps me keep that seam straight and folded under. So I always hold the front and the back, and I let the machine guide it through. should not sew while looking at the camera either. Catch my finger in it. And it's just top stitching that seam down is what it's doing all the way across, which actually hems the bottom of this opening for our tie. This next step is just putting, let me make sure I go in order. Yes. Putting the straps on. I'm sorry, I don't have enough room to lay it out and pin it and show you everything. So I'm trying to do it in front of the camera. Now, the straps center on the seam here, the bodice seam. And I just put a pin right in the center. Same for the other side. Again, just centered on the seam. And the raw edge of the strap is at the top, the finished edge is at the bottom. Then we place the outer bodice on top, and I just move my pin over. And pin around the outside edge of the strap to hold it in place. Same on the other side. On kids, there are markings on the pattern piece for where to place your strap, so you can place it that way. Women's is just on the seam. And some find this part difficult because it's a cup again. You're having to maneuver it around your machine. And I'm pivoting at that point so I get a nice point on the bodice. And there's no way I'm going to serge this, so I'm just going to clip that string first. but I'm just going to clip the curves toward the sewing, but not through the seam allowance, or not through the stitches.
You're gonna clip a string?
Well, you're not over here doing it for me. And I do that around the entire curve here, about every 1/4 to 1/2 inch. That will just make it lay flatter when you turn it right side out. Now, even though I can't completely serge this, I do like to serge where my straps are. It's just a little extra added support for where the straps are. Just to help hold them in a little better, because I know my daughter, she's going to tug on those straps and definitely don't want them coming out. So I just sewed across the straps just to give extra support there. That's the front piece there. So you can see. Now we're going to take our 2 back pieces, the main and the lining, and just place them right sides together. And sew across the top. Just attaching them together at the top there. Now, this is completely optional. I think I'm knocking stuff off my table, or the wind is. Okay, this is completely optional, only if you want to. Yes, Riley, I will post it to the wall so it's there. My daughter's hips are bigger than her bust, but I cut the entire back to the width of her hips just so it would be easier to pull on and take off. So I'm sewing elastic in, and what I did is I just took my piece, laid the elastic down, and cut it 1.5 to 2 inches shorter than the width. And I turn off my blade on my serger. Let me clip this string first. And slide it under there. Get started, and then I just stretch the fabric to fit the full width, or the elastic, sorry. To fit the full width of the fabric, and I sew it in place. That is optional, but it's just a little extra added support in the back. Mine was plenty tight enough without it, and so was my daughter's, but I also made her last one to her chest measurement at the top, so it was a little more difficult to slide on over her butt. So this will make it easier. Now that's our back piece. And I know the video's getting long. I'm going slow so I can try to explain everything. Next step is the gathering. And since I use embroidery thread for my sewing here, I'm changing out to a more sturdy thread for the gathering stitch. The top stitch will be fine, but the bottom needs to be a sturdier thread so you can gather. And that's just how I get my strings out longer, just scrap fabric. Set my machine to the longest stitch, and starting at this seam at the bottom of the bodice here. Now remember, my my lining is not going to be ruched, but starting at that bottom bodice seam, I'm just going to sew a gathering stitch all down that edge. And the other side, from the leg all the way up to the bottom of the bodice. Now let's see if I can do the gathering on my table and you still see it. Gotta move a few things though. Okay. To figure out the length we need, the back bodice, this seam on the back bodice will be lined up with the very top of the front bodice seam. The main bodice here is not gathered, so you will only be gathering below this to fit to that. There's not a lot of room here, so bear with me while I try to get it to match up. So, let's see if you can see. Okay. So the bodice seams here are lined up. The back body, the top of it, and the top of the bodice, where the main and the lining are sewn together. Now we will just pull the bobbin thread and gather it. I do it from this side so I'm not reaching across the camera there. And this will just create the ruched front body. And I like mine to be fairly evenly ruched all the way down. If you prefer, you could ruche just down to a few inches above the bottom, and then it wouldn't be ruched below the stomach. But I like mine all the way down. once I get it about the right length, then I'll move my gathers around and try to even them out some. Do you want to go see what the kids are wanting?
Yep. What are you guys talking about?
Now I'm going to do the other side. Again, line it up with where the lining and the main meet on both sides.
What?
And we're only gathering under the bodice.
Well, sorry, it's lost.
What'd they do?
They threw a peanut butter lid across the road like a frisbee.
Oh, I bet that was that pretzel bucket lid.
No.
It was out there by the pond. Sorry guys, my kids are outside, so I'm trying to keep an eye on them. Have all the windows and the door open so I can hear and see them. You can probably all hear them in the background. A little bit more. Those that know me know that I really, really hate gathering anything. I do not like doing ruffles and gathering. And I don't even know why. It's not like it's hard. It's just, I hate it. So, get it lined up. It'll be approximately the same length as the back there. And the next step, we have our back body. Let me move more stuff. And that's my sewing machine presser foot cord, so it's not, let me see if I can move it out of my way here. And then you get it laid out. Then you take the front. I'm going to show you another trick here. Straps are always in the way when I do this, so I tie them up in a little ball here just to get them out of my way while I pin the sides and sew it. Line up this seam here and pin. Move my papers here. And I'm actually pinning a few spots on this because I want to be sure I get the ruching to look even. And this swim knit is such amazing quality. I'm still trying to order more swim knit. I have a few more places to try, but this is really great quality. It's not thin like a lot of it I find. It's pretty thick. And if you guys have anywhere that you buy swim knit, be sure and post it in the comments because I'm always looking for other places to get swim knit. I know there's a few online places, and Joann's has some. Custom groups. I do get a lot from custom groups. And this is from Bean Pop, and the cherry polka dot one I sewed was from Snowy Owl. And I actually have my daughter one cut out from some Wonderlust fabric that I was going to sew today. But I am going to try both the Knit Pop Swim and Paris Bebe. I have no clue how you say that. But I'm going to try both of their swim, and I want to try a Fabric Fairy. I think it would be pretty awesome to just go through and try all of the different swim fabrics from everyone and compare them. My gathering string is there in my way. So those are the places I know about. I also know fabric.com has some, but I haven't ordered swim from them either. So I pinned the body all the way down, and I'm going to do the same to the back here. Not going to put as many pins in this though. I got swim knit from Joann's for the women's olive swimsuit that I'm working on. I haven't sewn it yet, but that red that I have here is from Joann's also, that I used for the straps. And yes, I love that it doesn't fray also. Which I serge the edge of my quilter's cotton so that it doesn't fray when I'm gathering it anyway. I always run a serger stitch down the edge just to stop it from fraying, because I get an actual pin and not a needle, because the fraying annoys me. And you can do the body, the front body lining ruched also. And if you do that, it will make a perfect maternity swimsuit. I do suggest you do the elastic in the back then, just so it's easier to pull up. Let's do the serger. And now I'm just going to sew. You can see I got the lining pinned to the lining, the main pinned to the main, front and back. And we're going to sew this side seam all the way down on both sides. I'll redo that. I'm going to put that pin farther down so I can get it under there and start it without having a pin on it. Oh, yeah. Sorry, I moved my presser foot, or my pedal, presser foot, jeez. I moved my pedal out of the way earlier so I could pin. And I turned off my blade for the elastic. Oh yeah, you can still see. I like being next to my couch. I'm over here pushing all the pins into the arm of my couch while I sew. awesome. This is my first time sewing with Bean Pop Swim, so I'm not sure. I mean, the quality seems amazing, and I washed it before sewing with it, and there was no fading at all. So I'm thinking it's going to be pretty awesome. I did Wanderlust for my swimsuits last summer, and they held up amazing all summer. And I have the Snowy Owl that I sewed one of my suits with, and so far no fading on it either. But yeah, I've used Joann's. I miss Hancock. Hancock is where I got most of my swim fabric from, and I still have several from there. And I'm almost out. I'm sad because I never had problems with it either. We used it all summer. Oh, jeez. I caught my pen there. Just having issues with it. But you can see I'm just sewing down the side there, attaching front to back, mane and lining. I don't know how I got that gather there undone. I'm going to empty this real quick. And that's side seams all the way down sewn. I didn't catch that seam allowance there, so I'm going to sew back over it and catch it. I like my seam allowance to go toward the back. Yes, when I use my sewing machine instead of my serger, I use the lightning stitch most of the time. On my tie for the front, I didn't, but I usually use the lightning stitch. Or if you do not have the lightning stitch, use a zigzag stitch. No. Turn it right side out. Let me untie my straps again. At least a little, so you can see. And the front is ruched there. Clip my strings. I had a small pair of scissors here, but I don't know where I threw them to when I was moving around a while ago. Okay. Back to the sewing machine. Now I'm going to top stitch the bodice, just the top of it, and oh, I forgot to switch my bobbin thread back out. Hold on. And I'm setting it to the lightning stitch. And I always set my lightning stitch to the bigger stitch width and length because it stretches better when I do that. And I'm just rolling it between my fingers to get the edge right up there by me. Again, this is a women's, so it's got the cups in it, which is a little extra padding to maneuver around your machine. All the way around the front, and then we're going to do the back also. Just line up the, you can see there, and I've put the elastic in my back, so I am having to stretch it while I do this. If you didn't put the elastic, it doesn't have to be stretched. It'll be just like the front sewing around it. But because I put the elastic, I have to stretch it to make sure it so straight across. That's that. It's just sewn around the inside. Now the next step, this hole we put here for the tie, we're going to do a stitch around it just to hold the body and the lining, or the mane and the lining together. And I like to pin the edges here because this will shift and I want it to be lined up perfectly, so the hole is completely closed and lined up. Lightning stitch again, or zigzag if you don't have lightning. Hear my kids outside arguing? They were upset because we told them that if they went outside before I started sewing, they had to stay outside. And now they're out there arguing with each other. Jeez. There. Now, that's sewn together. Probably, well, there. Probably not the prettiest stitch I've done. But the tie will be sewn on there in a few minutes too. Now, let me make sure I go in order again. Yeah. Now we will take, and this is, found my small scissors. Clip these strings real quick. I want to pick up strings everywhere because I keep tossing them over here on the couch because I'm used to my trash can being over here. Back to my serger for this. I do find it easier to use a serger when working with swim knits, but the stretch stitch and pins work great too. Oh. Right sides together on the lining. That sews the crotch at the lining there together. Right sides together on the outer fabric, the main fabric, to sew it together there. Completely optional, only if you want, and I do this because the seam annoys me, but I top stitch my seam toward the back, the seam allowance, just so it goes toward the back and isn't moving around everywhere. And I do it on my lining too. Again, that's optional. You don't have to do it. It's just personal preference for me. Now, all that's left is sewing the tie on and sewing the leg elastic in. Pull the lining down and line it up. At the seam here. I find it much easier to sew my elastic on if I stitch the legs together first. So I line up both of the seams. Let me get a drink, you guys. So I line up both of the seams, and then I use my serger to run a stitch around, or to serge around, just to get the fabric held in place better so I can sew the elastic on easier. I did just trim a little off, but that won't be a big deal. Turning off your blade for this is a better idea. You can use your sewing machine to do that, but all it does is make the lining and the main a single piece so that you can work with it as one. Again with the other side. What was that?
We're playing with the wood on the side one.
Oh, okay. Go slow and line up that lining in the main, so you don't trim it off like that. I just trimmed a chunk of mine off because I was looking at the phone again. But you can see now it's just like one main piece. One solid piece to work with. Now I have my elastic, and I use 1/4 inch swim elastic. I leave my machine on the lightning bolt stitch. Wrap my elastic around, slide a pin through until I get my needle down in it. Once I get my needle down in it, I pull the pin out and I just stitch my elastic to make a loop. Repeat with the other piece. I'm sure everybody has their own way of doing this. This is just what I find easiest. I'm just clipping strings now. Now, take your elastic, find the opposite end there and place a pin, or you can use a Sharpie or anything really just to mark the opposite half so that it's split in two. Now, take this, the leg seam. The back curves out so it's a little wider than the front. So I line up starting at the crotch seam there, and I follow it around, line it up. See, it's just a little bit of difference there from the seam. And I place my elastic where it's pinned there, right there, on the inside. And then I place the other end on the seam. I use my serger to sew my elastic on. You can use your sewing machine with a stretch stitch and get the same thing. Turn your blade off. You don't want to cut the elastic, so having the blade off is best. And you can do it on the inside so you can see if you want. I mean, I usually do it on the outside, but I know it will be easier to see, to show you all if I do it on the inside here, so you can see. Slide it under, start stitching, pull the pin out. This other pin, it would have been easier if I'd have turned it inside out so you could see easier. But this other pin is in here so I can stretch my elastic to fit between those. It doesn't need a whole lot of stretch, but it does need a little bit of stretching. Remove this pin right before you get to it. Hope you guys can see that. I can try to move you a little. I got my phone on a table next to me. Again, we're stretching to fit. So that's the elastic in one leg. I'm going to go ahead and do the other leg before I continue. Again, pin in half. And line up the side so you can find the top center of the leg seam. Pin the elastic to the lining side. I'm going to do it right side out this time so you can see. Basically though, you're just making sure that that elastic is lined up with that edge and that you're stretching it to fit as needed. You can pin that all the way around if you prefer. Now to the sewing machine. And all we're doing is folding it under. And I want my red stitch on the outside just like I've done on the rest of it. So I'm not, since I never changed my bobbin when I changed my top thread, I'm not going to do mine inside out. But it's just folded under and you're just stitching all the way around. You may have to stretch slightly if you had to stretch the elastic so that it lines up. Fairly simple. This is usually easier to do from the inside so you can see where your elastic is. But I don't want to run an entire bobbin of red thread just so I can do that. I am slightly pulling mine in the back because my machine is messing up and it doesn't want to pull this fabric through. Thicker fabric right now. I think I'm eventually going to have to get me a new machine. This one is 4 or 5 years old though. And as much as I use it, I'm surprised it's held up so long. That's the leg elastic. And the final step is the tie. Optional again, but several wanted the tie to be attached, so you just slide it through halfway. Let me do this before I put it on there. Slide it through halfway and line it up. So much easier when I have more room to work with. to that center there, the center of the hole, the opening at the bottom of the bodice. Slide it onto your machine. Make sure that your tie is out of the way underneath so that it's straight up. And then just stitch across the top there, just to hold the tie in place. Pull it and tie it, depending on how tight you want it. And that's it. If you don't want the hole in the bodice, you can't do the tie, but you can just, the bodice piece, let me see if I can find mine. Tyson, can you hand me my bodice piece there? The other one. Yes. The bodice piece has a little opening here. If you do not want the opening at the bottom of the bodice, just do not cut that notch out, and your bodice piece will be solid all the way across. And as I said at the beginning of the video, if you don't want the opening as big, don't hem the hole. If you want the tie but you don't want the opening as big, do not hem the hole, and the opening will be a lot smaller. So it won't be open as much. And that's it. We got, let me move my machines out of the way. I hope I went slow enough for you all. I usually sew a lot faster. So I tried to pace myself and talk about things. But you can see it's completely done there. Hold on, I'm going to unhook my phone so I can show you. And then the back. And again, how amazing is that fabric? I hope you can see it because I can't really see what I'm showing you. But that's Beauty and the Beast. And this is pretty floral look to it. Okay, and that's it. Anybody got any other questions? Thanks, Cheryl and Jennifer. I love it. It got sent to me and arrived on release day.
Are you not going to try it on?
It's not for me, it's for Jessica. And
Make her put it on?
well, I could make her come downstairs and put it on, but I doubt she'll want to right this moment.
I can get her.
If you didn't do the
Just won't tell her.
hole in the tie, could you shirr it under the bust? Oh, you mean to make it? Yes, you could do that. You could you could either shirr or add a piece of elastic down the center of it, and that would pull it in without having to have the tie. And then if you wanted to, you could even add a faux tie on there. Yes, in the middle. Straight down the middle of the bodice. Let me see. I got one here. She just took off with that one. I think she went to put it on. So yeah. Here's hoping I measured for the right size on her. You do not need stabilizer. You need lining fabric and main fabric. And if you're doing women's, you need the swim cups. Okay, so this is the bodice. If you do not want the hole, you can see I made her hole a lot smaller on this one. I did not hem it before I sewed it, so the opening is just barely even there. You have to stretch it quite a bit to see it. And I'm sorry, I didn't clip strings. That's my husband's job. And if you do not want the opening and you do not want this tie, but you want the look of it being pulled together, sure, right down through here, through the center of the bodice, starting at the top of the sweetheart, straight down, and that will cinch that together and give you the effect of it without having a hole or a tie. Now, the option to not have the hole is not in the pattern, but you can do that easily if you just don't cut that notch out. And swim fabric, nylon spandex is what I usually buy, and swim elastic for the legs, and swim lining. It also has this skirt. Hold on, I'm going to switch you guys around. Okay, sorry. It also includes this skirt in the pattern. It's just a simple cover-up. It is maybe a 5-minute sew, because all you're sewing is the waistband and sewing it on. But it's a high-low circle skirt. Great for a cover-up. Yeah, can you pull it through and tie it from the inside? Yeah. She's got the swimsuit on. Sorry, my table's a mess, but Daddy's helping her tie it.
And then tie it.
Oh, okay. Turn around and show us the back, Jessica.
That's a good minute.
See? She's already got it on for you guys to see. And I don't even think she adjusted the straps from where I tied them.
No.
But you can see the ruching here. Ruching's great if you have a little bit of a stomach and you want to hide it, or if you're pregnant, it'll even stretch out quite a bit there to accommodate.
That's not a hint, Jeff.
No, that is not a hint. You're too young. But see? And you guys get to see my messy living room. Let's see the back again. And see, I added the elastic here just for extra. You can also, there are instructions in the pattern to put the straps as crisscross straps. It tells you how far apart to put them and to sew them in. Okay, any other questions? If not, I'm gonna go. Sorry, switching you back around. Anything else? Okay, guys, I'm going to go, and I'm going to make her leave that on so I can go out and take a few pictures of her in it. And, well, let me know if you have any questions. Sorry, I lost my train of thought because she's over there acting silly. Thanks, guys. Talk to you later.